Welcome to the Plan to Eat podcast, where I have conversations about meal planning, food, and wellness to help you save time in the kitchen, reduce your grocery bill, stress less about food, and delight in dinner time. Hello, welcome to another episode of the Plan to Eat podcast. Back with Riley.
Hi, happy to be here.
Today we are covering the topic of less being more and why less can be more related to meal planning. When I think about the idea of less is more, I think about kind of like minimalism. You think about people who do minimalism in their house, kind of like a Marie Kondo method of less clutter, just having the essentials. Minimalist, like a minimalist schedule. It's just kind of like a less busy schedule. You don't do things just because they're keeping you busy. You're doing things with intentionality. You have fewer distractions in your life. I think the point of the less is more is to be able to focus on the things that matter to you most. That's the general impression that I get when people talk about using a less is more, quote unquote, mindset. But I think it's really interesting to talk about it in the aspect of meal planning. We have so many things to go over today related to it. But I just want to start by saying we don't necessarily have to think of a simple less is more meal plan as just like what the meal plan looks like. It could be what the recipes are, what the ingredients are. Like there's lots of different ways in here where you could think of less is more. It could be like the macro to the micro.
Yeah, I love that. And I like to look at it and break it up into all those different things because everyone's going to think about a simple meal plan in a very different way. But that simple word, it's going to mean something different to everyone because what's simple to you might not be simple to me, or it might be even more simple to me than it is to you. So
I think that we can just jump right on in. We unfortunately did a lot of great talking on this topic right before we hit record. So we need to remember to talk about all the things that we mentioned right before we started. In general, I think it's good to start with the benefits of why we would even want to have a simpler meal plan, a less is more type of a meal plan. And the very first thing that comes right off the bat is just reducing decisions, making it less stressful, kind of streamlining everything so that there's a lot less to think about in your meal planning process.
I think it's also a lot more attainable.
Yeah.
It's also, especially if you're making a new habit of meal planning, I'm going to talk a lot about habits today, I think. And if you're making a new habit, you don't want to overcomplicate it so that you never actually make it a habit.
Yeah.
Starting with a baseline that you can, a good foundation that you can build on is a really important place to start, especially if meal planning is a very new habit for you.
Yeah.
We've talked about this a lot over the years of the podcast of just, if planning for 2 days is what you need to do, then start there.
Mm-hmm.
If planning for 5 dinners a week, because that's what you're already home for, is what you need to do, then do that. If you don't even need to worry about breakfast and lunches because those kind of take care of themselves, then leave that out.
Right.
You kind of pick and choose which parts of a meal plan work for you. And if you're getting started and you've never meal planned before and it's the most daunting task in your life, like think about it in terms of making it simple in that it works for you. Build it in a way that works for you. Don't look at what other people are doing. Don't look at meal plans online. Like think about, okay, when am I home? Well, I'm always home for dinner Wednesdays and Thursdays and Fridays. We're always home. We have activities every other night, or we're out with friends on the weekend or whatever. And just plan for those nights you're already home. Or if you're only ever home for breakfast and maybe a weird work schedule and you're gone for dinner every night, then plan for breakfast and lunches. Things like that. And I mean, I could go on and on and on about how to customize this for you. But I think just kind of sitting down with your schedule and thinking, okay, when am I home? Okay, I'm going to plan 2 meals. Like, just keep it that simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then don't pick a meal that takes 4 hours to cook on the first week you meal plan.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what you said, you kind of just went through all of those things. Like you have a simple meal plan, potentially you have simple ingredients or simple recipes that contain simple ingredients. All of those things kind of go together in that situation. And particularly for certain phases of life, you need all of those things to match up. Sometimes you could have a simple meal plan, maybe only plan a couple recipes a week, but those recipes could be kind of like long and complicated because the thing that you're valuing is maybe learning a new style of cooking or you just enjoy a long, elaborate meal process. Like I said earlier, it's kind of like the macro to the micro.
Yeah.
Sometimes the overall meal plan might be simple, but the implementation of it could be a little bit more complicated, just depending on what works for you and your situation. I would say that's actually kind of more how I meal plan a lot of the times is like my meal plan itself is super simple, but I like to try new recipes. And a lot of times that means that the recipe takes a little bit longer to cook because I'm
Mm.
unfamiliar with it. But I have the time, I choose nights where I know that I have the time to be able to make that maybe a little bit more complicated or new recipe. So they don't have to be, I guess the thing that I'm trying to say is like they don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. You
Yeah.
can do like a little bit of both in there.
Yeah. Absolutely. A mix and match, I think, is important
Yeah.
to really make it the most customizable for you and your family and what you like to do. Like
Hmm.
I tend to have a more complicated meal plan because I really like to cook. I like to
Right.
create in the kitchen. I pair that with having 2 kids who really like to have dinner at a specific time every night, and that doesn't always go how I want it to go. And so then I think, "Okay, I have got to do this faster. I can't just be tootling around in the kitchen creating dinner for an hour. Like, it needs to be like a half an hour or 20 minutes because
Right.
while I love to do this thing, it's not really working in the season of life that I'm in. And so instead of just getting super frustrated at meal planning, I just say, okay, the part of this problem that's not working is how long dinner takes. So
Right.
I've just got to make faster meals. So what does that mean? We can talk about more a little bit later, but just finding more simple recipes and being intentional to look at the how long something takes to cook. Not a lot of things are more frustrating than when you put something in the oven and it says, now bake for 1 hour. And you're like, shoot, I did not see that at the beginning of this recipe.
Totally.
And so here I am, and I've got an hour now, and I didn't start it in time or whatever. So just, being intentional to notice like what's the pain point for me and my family and my prep time or my food choices that I've made or ingredients that I've chosen to make. It's not necessarily the meal plan is the problem. It's that there are pieces of it that might not be working. So kind of finding the pain point and solving that pain point for your family is important.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that a lot too. That makes me think I have 2 different beef stroganoff recipes in my Plan to Eat account, and I always end up planning the wrong one. They
Yeah,
have just,
I
like,
know about
very
that.
slightly different ingredients, and the one that I end up planning, I don't know why, maybe it has a prettier picture or something. I always plan it, and it calls for you to put everything in your Dutch oven for, like, 3 hours or something before you eat the meal. I'm always like, "Dang it, I planned the wrong one." I end up, improvising and making the faster recipe. It's like I said, the ingredients are just slightly different. I think the longer cooking one obviously has more liquid in it, so it could kind of like cook down and simmer. I need to just delete that from my from my Plan D account, but I have this experience every time where I'm like, "Gee, dang it, this is supposed to be a fast recipe. It's supposed to take 3 hours."
What I have done to resolve that, because there's so many customization options in Plan to Eat, is I've made a category called recipes we love, a course category that it's
Yeah.
recipes we love. And there's anything from tacos to chicken nuggets to like dessert options like breakfast bakes. It is not meal specific or, like sides or whatever. It's just, do we love it? And I put it there, and that helps me because then I don't delete really good recipes. I just kind of converge them into one place where like these are our go-tos.
Yeah, I like that. I ended up just giving the one that I don't want to make a 1 star.
Oh, good. Yeah, that works too.
So now
Yep.
I see the 1 star on it, and I'm like, "Don't plan that one."
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
back on track.
Yeah. I would say that in general, simple meal planning is probably what the majority of people are going for in
I would
life
think
right
so.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the more complicated meal planning is probably the more outlier. There's a specific group of people who do that, who are making the recipes they got from a cooking class in Italy, homemade pasta, etc.
Yeah.
But I would say simple, like this idea of simple, basic meal planning. One, it doesn't have to be. I hate the word basic, and I actually don't like the word simple because it makes it sound bland and boring. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be those things, but I would say simple is probably what the majority of people are going for in their
Right.
day to day life.
Yeah, maybe we could call it minimalist meal
Minimalist
planning.
planning. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's also a subset here of people who potentially are working around food allergies
Mhm.
or, like restrictions within their household that can make meal planning feel a lot more challenging.
Absolutely.
I don't think that that means that you don't have to not have a minimalist meal plan in that sort of a situation, but it might require a little more intentionality. I'm thinking of people
Absolutely.
who email us who are like, have one child that can't eat the same things as everybody else, so we have to make them a special meal.
Mhm.
And I know that that gets a lot more complicated. So we might not be able to solve that problem in this podcast today, but I think that even if those kinds are the kinds of restrictions that you're working with, I think you can still find a way to make a minimalist meal plan. Because in my vision of it, a lot of times it does involve these like fewer ingredients.
Mhm.
You're trying to plan recipes that maybe use the same ingredients. If you have fewer ingredients, I think it's easier to coordinate your ingredients, in which
Absolutely,
case,
yeah.
you can either focus on leftovers or you're just able to have like meal combinations within your week where you use the same ingredients, you're wasting less food, and just like doing that kind of like reusing idea. And potentially, if you have somebody in your family who maybe they can't have gluten or maybe they can't have dairy or eggs, something like that, but they're fine with poultry. And so like maybe you can have chicken for everybody. And
Right.
for most of the family, it goes into a casserole. For this one specific family member, you just make them like, roast chicken and green beans or something. I feel like there's a way to make it
Yeah.
so that you're not spending so much extra time and effort making multiple meals for people. And your meal plan also then is able to still be simple because you're not buying so many extra ingredients to accommodate, our specific person with their needs.
Yeah. And that is, that does become the, Tetris kind of meal planning. But like I would say like baseline, this is what everyone is eating. And then the extras are what some people are eating. Like it's kind of a helpful way to look at it.
Yeah.
If it's possible to do batch cooking or meal prepping, whatever you call it, on the weekends or on a day when you're home from work, or I utilize nap time quite a bit to prep food ingredients. And that is something that I'm able to do, but not every day I'm able to do
Yeah.
that. And so, I try to think, okay, today's a day when I've got some time. I'm going to make something I make often is green chili and I freeze it. And I mean, I might just make it and we don't even eat it. I try not to do that because if I make it and we eat some of it and I freeze the rest of it, it's a much more like simple, friendly, week friendly. I'm trying to think like less stress. Like I'm doing the work once and it's feeding us that moment and I'm not having to do
Yeah.
double work for that night's dinner or whatever. Um, but I'll make it during nap time one day and then just, divide it up for freezing for different meals. And, that kind of thing can help when everyone's eating this, but then that person can't have the side dish or everyone else needs this extra thing. And I can, like once you've made some things and you've prepped them and frozen them, or you've got some like aids, like, okay, I've got a box of this I can put together for these people, but I don't have it for this. And that mix and match aspect of things can become a little simpler when you've done some prepping, when you've got some extra time in your schedule, which I say with a grin because I know that that's, extra time in your schedule is a hard thing to come by sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I wanted to mention with this minimalist style of meal planning is the fact that I think it allows for more flexibility.
Oh, yeah.
And so kind of some of the things that you're talking about here is like maybe you are able to make some of your things ahead of time and you're able to like get ahead of your week a little bit. And it's because you planned kind of simple
Yeah.
meals with simple ingredients that when you do that meal prep, so much of that work is going into multiple meals for the rest of your
Yes. Yeah.
week, which I think just then allows you the flexibility to be like, okay, I have all this prepped. Like maybe we had enchiladas planned for this night, but it's not exactly what we're feeling. Like we'll save our enchilada sauce for later because the kids want tacos instead, but
Hmm.
it's all the
Hmm.
same basic ingredients and, can go into a different meal. So I know a big problem that people can have with meal planning is just the idea of like, we like to be spontaneous. We like to, choose what we're eating on a day by day basis because I don't know what I'm going to be in the mood for on Thursday when I'm meal planning on Sunday. And so there's a little bit more of this flexibility aspect in that too, where when you kind of start, you mentioned earlier, a foundation and that foundation could just be your simple ingredients that then go into whatever the recipes are that sound good and feel good to everybody later in the week.
Yeah, what that makes me think of is how I tend to meal plan, and, I'll put a meal on every night's dinner for 5 nights a week or 4 nights a week, depending on the week. But then usually at breakfast, I'll ask, "What do you guys think for dinner?" And half the time people say they don't know or they don't care, and I have to just decide, which is fine because 'cause I'll just pick whatever I put that night. But then that allows me to think, "Okay, well, if we're having chicken and the chicken's frozen, I need to thaw it all day." Or, most often it's I ask at breakfast because of that thawing aspect,
Yeah.
that I do need it to be thawing all day before dinner. Or, maybe, we'll have a pizza night, and that means I'm just picking up pizza for dinner, but that could have been Friday or it could have been Monday. And it's just a whenever we decide is the night that we're doing it, then that tells me I actually don't need to thaw anything out because tonight's pizza night. But because it's planned, and it's budgeted for, it's not like it doesn't feel like a desperate attempt at dinner. It feels like a choice. It feels like I
Yeah.
had like an intentional part of making that decision instead of having to do something because people have to eat.
Right.
Nothing is worse than getting to 5:30 and thinking, "Oh man, what are we gonna have for dinner?" One, I didn't thaw anything. We live too far from a pickup place, whatever.
Yeah.
And feeling like, man, I've got to come up with something in that like little like dinner time panic that is not a fun thing to navigate. But habits, this is where I'm going to tie in some of the habit thing. I was reading about habits in preparation for this, and habit can follow it's called a habit loop. And it's like a cue, a routine, and a behavior. And it's kind of like you get up in the morning, you start your coffee pot. So getting up's maybe the cue, you start your coffee pot is the routine, and then you drink your coffee, that's the behavior. But all of those things build to the actual habit, which is drinking your coffee every morning. So, this is kind of along those same lines. Like I wake up in the morning, we have breakfast. Okay, what are we going to have for dinner? Okay, it's breakfast. I'm going to ask about dinner because I've got to thaw something. Like these are the cues, and then the routine, thawing it out, and then making the dinner. And all these things are really hard to build, but when you start to do them in your everyday, it becomes a much simpler process. And I don't remember how we got on this topic, but you were talking about lack of flexibility. But I actually think that when you have a meal plan, it gives you more flexibility and more
Mm.
freedom because one, I think of freedom in regards to budgeting and how, like, if I have made a plan that we're going to pick up pizza for dinner, then that's an intentional choice that I planned for instead of, oh man, we didn't plan for dinner out at pizza or whatever, that kind of thing. And then it's outside of the budget that we'd set. So then it's less freedom to
Mhm.
me. But kind of when you build these things into being a habit, it does actually feel like something you want to do, you get to choose to do. And that feels like freedom and flexibility to me. But I'm a very habit-oriented person. My days look very similar. There's a lot of beats to them that are the same. And so I like to look at this like a habit because I like to form new habits, especially ones that are
Yeah.
positive. So
Yeah. One of the examples that I wanted to give today is from a recent podcast episode. It was with Diana Rice, episode 86, if you guys haven't listened to it. And Diana talks about her process for meal planning, which is just, I was going to talk about this in kind of like the practical ways that you can
yeah.
implement a simple meal plan, but I think it fits really well here since you were talking about habits. And so she kind of does like a capsule idea where she said she based it off of the capsule wardrobe idea where you have, you know, 10 blouses and, 5 pairs of pants. And those are the only things that you own. And you do the like, mix and match kind of thing. And, maybe everything kind of has like a similar color palette and it just is very simple. And the point of it is to reduce decision fatigue about like, what am I going to put on today to look presentable?
Yeah.
Which I should really implement because I
Yeah,
struggle
I
with that
love the
every
idea. I
single
love
day.
it. Yeah.
And so she talks about like literally only putting a maximum of like 30 recipes into your plan to eat account. So that way you are not overwhelmed by looking at 2,000 recipes like it's in my plan to eat account.
Yeah.
And so then you just have this smaller rotation of meals and you're able to just like pick, like, okay, well, we only have so many recipes to choose from. And you do end up eating meals kind of on repeat, but it's not like, every single week you're eating the exact same meals. You still have 30 meals to choose from. That means technically you could have 6 weeks, of meals if you
Mhm.
needed. But one of the things that she mentioned related to that was that she said that it's actually can be really comforting for kids to have this sort of like repeated recipes because there's like a predictability to that.
Mhm.
And so this is how I feel about habits is like habits are very comforting to me. And I think that's probably how they are
Yeah.
for you because it's just like a predictability to it. And you're no longer thinking about the process so much because it's just become a habit for you. And anyways, and so she mentioned that in reference to her kids because she said a lot of children thrive on habitual things,
Mhm.
repeatability.
Yeah.
It gives them kind of like an ease in their life. So that's a practical way that you can incorporate this into your meal planning, but also ties back into habits of just having that predictability in your life is really helpful and can make you feel so much less stressed when it comes to meal planning.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many ideas on this topic, and my mind is just reeling because that's such a good way to look at it, a great way to meal plan, especially for people who are trying to form a new habit, who are not meal planners, who don't think that they are meal planners. One, you get really good at cooking those things, and then
Yeah.
it becomes more autopilot, which automatically lowers stress if you know what you're making. You don't have to even glance at a recipe because you kind of just know. But I wonder what Katie Kimball would say about that in a positive way about picky eating, because
Yeah.
then kids are exposed to, especially if you're meal planning, those 30 recipes are very well rounded, very well, like very colorful, a lot of variety of ingredients, variety of flavors, things like that. Then you're introducing your kids to a lot of things. And, if a kid thinks they don't like something, they're going to see it once a week or once every 2 weeks, and
Yeah.
that repetition's really good for them from oh, okay, broccoli is not scary. I can eat broccoli. And I see it all the time because, Katie talked about how it takes like 18 interactions with a food for a kid to be excited or interested in trying and actually putting it in their mouth to eat it.
Yeah.
And so like that kind of gives them that repetition to know, okay, this is a safe food. Okay, I've seen it a lot. I'm gonna try it now, which is awesome. I think that routines are really good for my kids. I even have this thing on my fridge, and maybe I'm creating tiny planners, but it's called Tiny Rhythms. We can put a link in the show notes for it, but little magnets for our fridge. And so every day I change up what we're doing every day. Some of it stays the same, but it's little magnets that say things like school, reading, outside play, screen time, lunch, nap time, like, every one of them is different, so I can rearrange it every day, but then my 4-year-old can go to the fridge and see, "Okay, here's what my day looks like," and she likes to know. She likes to know what we're doing, likes to know what we're eating, likes to know what's for dinner, likes to know what the next thing that she gets to do that day is, and a
Mm.
lot of her days look the same, but that schedule is kind of our anchor point of like, "Okay, well, if I told you you could have screen time today and it's on the schedule, like, you get to do that." And then that's a really exciting thing for her because it's not an
Mhm.
everyday activity. Or if it says, like, we're gonna go to the park. Well, we don't go to the park that often. We don't live close to parks. So, that's a bit, like, gets her an idea of what we're doing that day. And that feels like the 30 recipes thing. Like, it gives you
Mhm.
kind of an anchor of, like, this is what we're doing. This is what we do. We can do something outside of it if we want to, but we've got this solid thing that gives us a really good foundation for what our meals are gonna be, what we're cooking. That means that, if mom's the primary cook, then dad could step in because he knows, or whatever, or if dad's the primary cook, mom could step in because she knows, and, the flavors, she can get it right because she knows what it's supposed to taste like and things like that. And I just think these kinds of things, I mean, you and I just talked about how habits and these kind of things are very comforting to us, but I do think it's good for everyone in the family to kind of have a sense of knowing what's coming, or knowing what foods they like and dinners that they like and things like that. It kind of feels like a safe place. I mean,
Yeah.
comforting, safe place. All these things, I don't know, they feel really good, and my kids thrive in that kind of schedule, and so I think that they would probably really like that. I'd
Mhm.
probably do that. I just call it ruts. We get into
Yeah.
ruts,
Yeah.
and then I go rogue and make a new meal plan. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So that makes me think about I can't it's not coming to me who talked about this on the podcast, but I think somebody earlier in the summer talked about this on the podcast of the benefit of posting your meal plan in your kitchen on your refrigerator, like printing out your meal plan from Plan to Eat, posting it on the refrigerator
Mhm.
so that everybody's aware of what's for dinner. And she talked about it in the way of reducing the amount of like pushback that you might get from your kids or like negotiation that you have with your children because she was like it's almost like when your kids are in school and there's the hot lunch menu. They might look at what's on the hot lunch menu for that day and be like, "Ooh, sloppy joes. Ugh, I'm not really into sloppy joes, but it's what's for lunch." You like there's some mental psychology principle that happens there where it's like, it's written down, which means it's like set in stone.
Yeah, already
I
decided.
can't argue with it. And so she said it kind of works that same way in her household where it's like she's created the meal plan. Number one, it's amazing because nobody's being like, what's for dinner tonight? Because it's listed on the fridge. But number two, the kids aren't like, well, I didn't want to have spaghetti tonight. Instead, they're just like, okay, it's spaghetti tonight, but tomorrow is, mac and cheese, which is my favorite. It kind of like gives them that. I mean, it's part of that predictability aspect as well, where they're able to see like, okay, my favorite meal is coming up sometime this week. But then it reduces that like back and forth of when if they ask what's for dinner and you say, I don't know, I haven't really decided yet. They're like, well, what if we had hot dogs? Or,
You and I are both children of the 90s, and when you think about your childhood, you probably think of, like, 10 different recipes, right?
totally.
Maybe 5. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think back and think, "Wow, we eat something different every night." I'm like,
Never.
"Man, my mom's favorite 5 things she made." And I'm sure she made other foods, but in
Totally.
my mind, she has these staples, like,
Tuna
"This is what we had,
casserole.
loved these things." Yeah, sure, whatever it is for your household, there were things you loved, and
Yeah.
I was laughing to myself when you were talking about, "Oh, yeah, mac and cheese is for dinner tomorrow night." Like, it gives your kid a future hope. Like,
Yeah.
"Okay,
Yeah.
okay, tonight's the broccoli thing I don't like, but tomorrow night's mac and cheese." Like, I can get there. Yeah, I think it isn't it also probably reduces the, "What's for dinner?" question, which can be
Yeah.
very annoying. My children can't read, so I just tell them what's for dinner,
Yeah.
and usually I mean, I might get pushback, but also, like, I'm the one cooking it, so
Right.
but you can help me. You can help me do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so we talked a little bit about what Diana's process is. Why don't you give us your process for what a simple meal plan might look for you and your family?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, I can tend to overcomplicate it. And that's just because I really like to be creative in the kitchen and I get tired of making the same things and I like, want to try new things or whatever. So I tend to have a complicated meal plan. My mom was here over the summer and she said, You probably need to like rein this in a little bit. Like because I was very stressed and I had a lot on my plate but I was holding out hope for this, like, creative time, like, "Oh, this creativity, like, I get to be creative in the kitchen, like, that's me time." Like, joke's on me, it's not me time, Like, it's not me time at this point in my life.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not. So, I've been really trying to actively choose more simple meal plans, things that don't take as long to cook. Like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't need to take an hour. Some of the things that I do is I just look at protein, carb, vegetable, and try to like you put different things in those categories. Okay, we've had chicken this week already. Let's have beef or mushroom burgers or turkey something. Like I kind of try to pick a different protein and then kind of build sides around it. I also just try to use really simple things like a protein and a carb with an interesting sauce and a side salad.
Yeah.
Try to make a sauce be the interesting thing that kind of makes the meal different that time. One of our favorite things that we have is ribeye steaks with French fries and either green beans or a salad, some kind of green side, squash. But I love to make this basil aioli to go with that meal. And my husband was like, "Okay, I'm done with the basil aioli. We got to be done." I love it. I put it on because to me, it's like it goes on sandwiches, it goes on a salad, it's a dipping sauce, it's a burger topping. Like it can be so many things. So when I make it, I'll build my meal plan around that thing. And it kind of makes itself because of all the things I just told you. Like it goes so well on all these different recipes. But he was said, let's have chimichurri next time. Okay, well, that's another great thing. So let's have chimichurri on the steaks, and then the next day we can have some kind of rice bowl, chimichurri chicken rice bowl or something. So then utilizing that ingredient throughout. I'm not really telling you how I meal plan, but I'm giving you some ideas here. Um, well, I'll backtrack to my process, but I was just thinking another way that I do that is like sauerkraut. Like I'll buy sauerkraut or I'll make sauerkraut and then I'll think, okay, this is too much for us to eat in one night. So we're going to have it on brats or hot dogs, or then we're going to have it on like a Reuben, or then I'm going to make like a kraut burger. Like you kind of like can use that one thing. So it's not going to waste or it's not next week we'll have it on something, but it's very different in all of those meals. So I guess let me backtrack for you. I usually just look at the week and think, okay, we're not going to be home for dinner Friday. We're not going to be home for dinner Saturday. We'll be home for dinner all the rest of the nights that week, Monday through Thursday or Sunday through Thursday. And we're going to have friends over this night. So I kind of get an idea of like what the week look like as far as dinners go, because I don't do a lot of planning for breakfast and lunches because I have staple ingredients that I buy, eggs, a variety of breakfast meats, a lot of fruit, a lot of yogurt, cottage cheese, those kinds of things, toast. We have a variety of those kinds of things for breakfast. And then lunches are either leftovers or sandwiches. My 4-year-old loves a sandwich. And so it can be hard to get her to want to eat anything else for lunch because that is one of her favorite foods. And she actually is starting to be able to make it herself. And so go for it, girl. Like make your own sandwich. We got this. But so dinners is what I primarily focus on. And then I just think about, well, we haven't had much lately. And like I said, this is kind of where I try to be creative, even if it's simple. Okay, we haven't had any fish. Let's have some salmon or something. We have a lot of chicken, so let's back away from the chicken and let's have something different, pork or something along those lines. And then I do kind of run through, okay, like we could have something Italian. Okay, so what's an Italian recipe with pork or something along those lines? It kind of run, okay, how can I flavor this in a certain way? And then what kind of sides go well with that? Or what do we need to eat at home that we already have? Because I've been really trying to go through some of our freezer food storage and like make sure that we're not wasting that because it's been in there too long. And so sometimes I'll not think, sometimes I'll add just a freezer recipe to the meal plan. And so I think, okay, like I mentioned earlier, I've got green chili frozen. So what are we going to have with that? Because it's often not just that by itself. It's a burrito smothered in green chili, or it's like a breakfast nacho thing we have called chilaquiles with green chili on top of it. And so I'm utilizing things from my freezer, planning around things from my freezer, but then kind of giving it a flair of something kind of new. So we're not eating the same things all the time because that's not my favorite thing, even though I do get into ruts because certain things I just like. So simple meal plans. Here's just an idea of what one looks like for us. Salmon teriyaki, frozen mixed vegetables, coconut rice. That's like a 20-minute meal at our house. Beef burritos with beans and like all the good toppings like chopped tomatoes or pico, guacamole, sour cream, things like that. Like it can make a really exciting meal, but it takes you 20 minutes or less to cook it. Breakfast for dinner is always a winner. And that's on repeat a lot in our simple meal planning era because it's fast and because everyone likes it. And usually it's pretty high protein going into bedtime. So my kids sleep a long time because they're full. Some kind of spaghetti bake or spaghetti and meatballs or some kind of pasta dish that kind of can rotate through. We don't actually eat a lot of pasta here. We eat a lot more rice at our house than pasta, but I'm trying to mix it up by adding some pasta in. So that's kind of an idea how I meal plan and some of like what our meals look like. A really large salad with fruit and a protein of some kind. And those are things that we just really like. But I've been really trying to not overdo it. So I've been really trying to lean into a hot sandwich can be a good dinner option. It doesn't have to be air quotes fancy. And so I've been really trying to lean into like this thing I think is a lunch item can be a simple dinner. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And then also leaning into like these aids. I've talked about this before. Like I tend to buy marinara sauce and then use it in a variety of ways with like 90% of the meal being homemade. But or like I just said, like frozen mixed vegetables. I didn't have to chop it. I just bought one little mixed bag of things and used that. It's a great item to keep in your freezer for things like that, where you just pull it out and you can add it to a meal. But I definitely lean on those kinds of things as a tool for making meals easier and more simple because you can look at them as oh, it's like frozen processed, but like it's just frozen vegetables or it's just frozen fruit or it's
Yeah.
it's like it's got good ingredients. You can still get good ingredient items that just make your meal planning life simpler.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure that they have done nutritional value studies on frozen vegetables and stuff, and they're actually really high in nutritional content because they're flash frozen more immediately after they're harvested than a lot of times what you get in the grocery store. A lot of times what you get in the grocery store spent weeks getting to you. And so the frozen vegetables actually sometimes they have really high nutrition content. And it's just really convenient to have those
Yeah.
things.
This is
So
not a pain point. I didn't even
yeah.
intend to say that as like a negative. Like I use the word tool on purpose because I'm not trying to say that those things are bad. I'm actively using them as tools in my meal plan to make life easier for myself because that's the season of life I'm in. I don't feel bad about it. And I think that's a good place for me to be because I can get oh, I want to make it all from scratch or I want to do this or that or whatever. And it's just not where I'm at right now. And so just giving myself permission to make my life a little simpler by buying those things that are, like you just said, just as good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for my own meal planning, I mean, we're kind of similar in a lot of ways where the main focus for me is planning dinners, putting dinners on the meal plan. and then we eat leftovers a lot for both lunch and then sometimes for dinner. Like last night was just a leftovers. What do we have that's left over in the fridge? Eat that thing.
Yeah,
And
we do those too.
then yeah, and then doing just kind of like staples things for breakfast. I don't ever put breakfast on my meal plan because we don't need it. We just eat things like, cottage cheese or eggs and toast. And so I don't need to plan a recipe for those kinds of things. Lunch is
It's a
often
big deal if my breakfast is something other than that.
yeah,
it's like a big day. It's like one
yeah.
Saturday a month I'll make a real breakfast.
Well, and honestly, I always have staples items for breakfast, like, hanging around my house anyways, and so if we wanted to do, like, French toast or something, all I need to do is go buy, like, a nice loaf of challah bread at the grocery store, and it's like, "Cool, now we got amazing French toast because we definitely already have the eggs and the milk and the maple syrup, you know?"
Mhm.
So those kinds of things are just yeah, they're very automatic at our house. I would say similar to you, some of our simple minimalist meals are things like a burrito bowl, just like charred broccoli, charring broccoli in the oven with a protein as a side. I would like to focus more on sauces like you do. I feel like sauces are hard for me to remember to make. But like our all-time favorite sauce, honestly, is just Greek yogurt with sriracha in it. My husband could just eat like a bowl of that. He loves that so much. And it's like high in protein, Greek yogurt. It's delicious. Let's see some other things. I'm really in a tortellini phase of my life right now.
Mm.
And so usually when I go to Costco, this is something else I'm gonna bring up is like bulk shopping. But usually when I go to Costco, I'll buy like the bulk option for frozen tortellinis. And I think it's like maybe 2 bags of frozen tortellinis. I'll usually buy 2 of them. So I have 4 bags of tortellinis in my freezer because there's so many things you can do with tortellini. You can either just have a regular pasta dish, I have a recipe in my Plan to Eat account that's called like meaty tortellini. Adorable name. And, it's just like ground beef and marinara sauce and tortellinis in a skillet. Or you can make like a really yummy like pasta salad. I love pasta salad with tortellini. You can make yummy soups with tortellini. I feel like it's so versatile. It's like as versatile as any other pasta, but it just tastes delicious because it's
Like
cheese
gnocchi
inside.
is kind of like this too. Like
Yes,
it's a really like very versatile thing you can throw into things.
exactly. Yeah. And so, yeah, so I just do things like that. And a lot of these, even though I mentioned earlier, a lot of the times my meal plan might look really simple, but the application is a little more complicated. That's not all the time. Like that meat tortellini skillet is like a 20-minute meal. But I do, at like you are, Riley, I do like to cook. And so and because I don't have children, I can spend more time in the kitchen on an evening. I can start cooking at 5 PM and it's okay that we don't eat till 7. That rarely ever happens.
Yeah.
I do not spend 2 hours cooking. Anyways, one of the things that I wanted to mention about my process is I'm sure if you listen to the podcast, you've heard me mention that I don't have much room for bulk shopping in my
Mm.
kitchen. I have a very small kitchen, but I do find that when I create a simple meal plan, it is an opportunity to do some of that bulk shopping. Like I said, buying the tortellinis in bulk, and then maybe we have 4 different tortellini recipes over the course of a month. I just think that when you're able to create more of this minimal, simple meal plan and you try to coordinate your recipes to go along with each other, you have the ability to buy things in bulk more
Yeah.
frequently. If you know that this week you're having 3 recipes and they all have chicken in them, buy the chicken in bulk and, freeze the things for later in the week or later in the month. One thing that comes to mind with this kind of simple meal planning is it can be also easier to create a longer meal plan, a meal plan that goes
Mhm.
out for longer in the month because you can create maybe 1 week of simple recipes. Even if you so may say you created 2 weeks of simple recipes, like copying those to the second 2 weeks of the month and then having a whole month planned is like there's probably enough variety in there. Nobody's gonna notice that you're eating the same recipes, but then you're able to really strategically plan those bulk shopping trips so that you're like, we're buying chicken for the whole month, or we're buying our tortellinis for the whole month
Mhm.
rather than, buying so many separate ingredients because everything is one night you're eating Asian and the next night you're eating Mexican and then you're eating Italian. You're able to coordinate those things a little bit more. And to your point, eating a meal that's just kind of like a protein, a carb, and a vegetable can make that really a lot easier as
Yeah.
well. Rather than sticking within like cuisine types, doing just kind of like a simple plate setup can make that bulk buying process a lot easier because you're like, well, we're just grilling a bunch of chicken and then we're
Mhm.
eating grilled chicken for 4 days. And
Yeah.
some days it's just going to be grilled chicken with some vegetables. Another day I'm going to put it into a casserole. This is, I feel like, where the idea of creating kind of like creating your own meal planning system. So like Diana Rice's system was creating her capsule menus. I
Mhm.
feel like creating your own meal planning system in this can make us creating a minimalist meal plan easier because you can kind of plan things around protein type or you can plan things around cuisine. And so, we talked a really long time ago with Amy Udell, who talked about having anchors
Yeah.
for your meal planning. And so for a long time, hers was their budget. And she had to plan for an entire month ahead of time because they
Mhm.
only got paid once a month. And so that was the anchor for her entire meal plan was like, how do I only spend X number of dollars
Yeah.
on my food for the entire month? But your anchor might be that maybe somebody has a food allergy. And so you anchor your things around accommodating that food allergy. Or maybe, there are only two types of protein that your kids like to eat, chicken and beef, chicken and pork. And so you anchor your entire meal plan around those things to try and make it less, try and make the decision process less with those things. I really loved that idea of creating an anchor for your meal plan, whether it's like budget or your schedule.
Mhm.
Schedule, I feel like, is like the most common for people to lean on, and they might not even
Yeah.
realize that that's their anchor for their meal plan is like looking at their calendar, making a meal plan for busy night, to work around busy nights. But I just really love that idea. And it can be so dynamic for literally anything that you have going on in your life. Maybe the bulk shopping is the thing that's the anchor for your meal plan. I don't know.
I would say that also doing that kind of shopping and planning helps you waste less because there's certain things you buy. I mean, I'm just thinking like my basil aioli. I'll talk about that. Like I buy basil to go in my spaghetti so that there's fresh basil on the top, but then I've got all this basil left over. Maybe you go in your garden and you've got a ridiculous amount of basil because basil is one of those things that goes crazy in a garden. And like, so then making a basil aioli helps use a lot of that up. You put it on your spaghetti and then maybe you put it on a breakfast, what are those things called? With the hollandaise? What
Oh,
are
a
those things?
Benedict.
Benedict. Then
Yeah.
you've got some basil on a Benedict, like, that is one thing that is throughout the meal plan, but then you're using it up, you're not
Right.
wasting it. I hate when vegetables go bad, I hate when herbs
Mhm.
go bad in my fridge, and so or like I mentioned with sauerkraut, that I gave you 3 ideas to use sauerkraut up, and maybe by the end of the week, depending on your family size, then it's all gone. And I don't mind that. Like, I really like to use things up. If I bought them, I like to use them because then I know that I'm just not throwing away money. And so kind of planning around that is a good way to waste less food. Planning in general, waste less food, but this
Right.
also is another way. I would say that what feels like my anchor in my meal plan is that I do it the same every week. So
Mm.
Sunday night, I meal plan, Monday, I shop, and I don't shop again until the next week rolls around. I very rarely shop for more than 1 week at a time, just from, like I said, food waste. Like, I don't want vegetables to go bad and things. And even if I was able to plan around bulk shopping or chose to plan around bulk shopping, I would still go back for vegetables. And so
Right.
I would say my anchor is that I do it like I do it the same way all the time. Sunday night I plan, Monday I shop, and we're done. And that it's a very like it's just a very cyclical thing every week that I do, and that feels like my anchor. What would you say is your anchor?
Mm. The thing that first comes to mind, because it's not like ding, ding, ding for me,
Yeah.
but it is leftovers. I plan fewer recipes during the week on purpose because most of the recipes, since there's only two of us, most of the recipes we eat have leftovers. And so whether we're eating those leftovers, some leftovers don't work well for lunch for my husband because he doesn't have a microwave to be able to heat things up in.
Mhm.
So a lot of times he just ends up taking a sandwich instead. But having those leftovers for dinner, I don't like over planning recipes. And then it's like, oh my gosh, we have so many leftovers in our fridge because I cooked every single night this week and every single recipe included leftovers in them. So I would say leftovers is more my anchor than anything
Mhm.
else, is just trying to be strategic about maybe only planning a recipe every other night on the meal planner. So that way it's like, okay, we've got things covered for leftovers. And then if a recipe doesn't have leftovers, it's not necessarily that big of a deal. I can either make a recipe from something that we have, in the cupboards. We always have one or two kind of like staples recipes on hand, or we can just go out to eat. My husband really likes
Mhm.
to go out to eat. And so going out to eat once or twice a week is not like a big deal. So yeah, that's probably
Yeah.
the thing for me.
Last month we talked about, or last podcast that I was on, we talked about how leftovers is kind of like a bad word for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But reframing that as like what you're doing is essentially meal prepping your week by
Right.
cooking just a few recipes. And I mean, I know people who that's the way they plan. They say, okay, we are going to have halibut and we're going to have pork and we're going to have roasted vegetables and we're going to have a loaf of French bread that we can toast. And like that is literally, or we're going to have a huge side salad. And then every single night of the week that they cook once and eat all week. And like, I think that's really great for some people. I think that that makes it super, like, think about how much less brain space that takes up because they just picked it, they cooked it, and they ate it. And there was never another choice made in that. I think in my family situation, my husband does not love meal prepped food. Say that instead of leftovers. And so he would not enjoy that. He likes the very, like, different every night of the week kind of meal plan. And so
Yeah.
that's what works well for us. And I'll eat the leftovers for lunch, and I don't mind eating it every day. But I know some people who do that, and it does seem like a very, like, low mental strain way to plan. I don't know how well that would work for kids. I don't think my kids would like that. I
Mm.
think that, I mean, obviously, if you grew up in a house that was the habit, then it probably wouldn't be a thing for those kids. But I think that my kids are so used to having something different all the time that they would be like, I am not eating another bite of halibut, lady. Like, but I think that's another way that people meal plan that is valuable to add to this conversation because especially I think for somebody like you and your husband, like I feel like that would be a really great way to do it. And it's kind of how you do it. It's just with a few
Mhm.
more recipes. But I know people who cook that way and eat all week and it's done. And it's like they just have a lot of, meal prepped containers, everything's portioned and they just heat it or whatever and they're good to
Yeah.
go.
There's
Yeah.
certainly pros and cons to it because a lot of the time, so I'll give enchiladas as an example because when I make enchiladas, there's always like 2 full Pyrex pans of enchiladas when I make them, it seems like. There's like so many enchiladas. And I like it because then maybe we eat enchiladas 3 nights in a row. But the problem with that is that then I don't wanna eat enchiladas for like another month.
Yeah. Yeah.
Enchiladas are like one of our favorite meals, but then sometimes when there's too many leftovers of it, you're like, "Yeah, I'm really tired of this now and I don't wanna eat it for a while." So I think
Mhm.
there's like a balance to find there between eating something for leftovers for the convenience factor of it, and then eating it too much, and then you don't like that recipe anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet that I wanted to talk about was finding the right system for you. I I see a lot of Instagram, social media content of people talking about how meal planning is like the bane of their existence. And it is literally the most miserable part of their life. And they hate cooking. They're ready to, like, they just never want to cook again. And I actually find that content unrelatable because I'm like, really? Like, how is it 2024 and you haven't found a way to do this that's not stressful? Like, I think because I like to find things that work better for like, I don't like to just sit in the this is miserable, and
Yeah.
I like to find, like let me backtrack. Okay, I will laugh out loud at the content that's like, "Oh, adulting is just planning meals over and over and over until the day that you die." Like, that's funny, but
Yeah.
I think that I struggle with the, like, agonizing content about meal planning because I have a system that works well for me, but I also hate that they are sitting in something that's so miserable and they haven't found a system that works for them,
Yeah.
Because we just talked about so many different methods of meal planning that could work for a variety of people and whatever their situation is. And I think that maybe ultimately the issue is that they just aren't trying systems and they haven't found like we talked about this earlier, like, oh, this is the pain point. Let me solve that pain point. It's like, okay, well, meal planning is the pain points. There's so many tools out there for meal planning. I mean, you could just do pen and paper, but that's not like honestly, it's not the most streamlined way to do it anymore. It doesn't give you a bank of recipes to pull from that automatically makes you a shopping list, and, like, that's what Plan to Eat does, and that's amazing. I would say that my pain point for meal planning is the taking the meal plan, because I like that part, to the shopping list. The getting the shopping list ingredients put together is a pain point, and so Plan to Eat's a tool that works really well for me to, like it gives me a shopping list, I just add my extra staples, and I'm done, and it takes
Right.
away that, like, hardship, that ick part. And I would just say, like, continue to try like, new habits are formed like, 18 days is, like, the earliest a new habit would be formed. And so just like if something's not working well for you, give it a little more time maybe, or try a new system. Maybe you're the person that needs the meal delivery kit because that pain point is so strong. It didn't work for me. I tried it to give it a go because it was really popular, and it just doesn't it's not the thing that solves my problem. But my encouragement to people out there who find meal planning just so terrible is to just keep looking for a system that works well for you and fits into your schedule and your life because they exist. These situations, there is a solution to your problem. I promise.
Well, I talked to Rebecca Zip last month on the podcast, and she actually is somebody who does not enjoy meal planning. But she has a very extensive meal plan. She plans a month ahead of time. And actually, I think this is kind of one of those things that's like a little bit of a misnomer is that like planning a month ahead of time is only for people who are like planner personalities. Like, how could you plan for a month ahead of time if you hate meal planning? But she plans for a month ahead of time because she hates meal planning. So she only wants to think about it once every 4 weeks. And within her meal plan, she's able to be flexible. She's able to move things around a little bit. She says basically at the beginning of every week, she reassesses what she planned for that week and is like, maybe it takes her 5 minutes to just be like, is this going to work for us this week? Is this not going to work for us? Cool, we're good to go. And I think that that's a really interesting idea for people who are like, meal
Yeah.
planning is the worst. How do you decide what to eat every day of your life? And people are asking you what's for dinner and what's for breakfast and what's for lunch. And you get these questions every single day. Actually, instead of only planning 3 days ahead of time, which sometimes we're like, if you need meal planning, plan for 3 days ahead of time, like just get a little bit ahead.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, maybe we flip the script and we say,
Yeah.
actually plan ahead for an entire month because if you dislike meal planning so much, do it less,
Yeah.
which means only meal plan for a month. And, I gave the example earlier of like create 2 unique weeks of meal plans and just double that up. And then you have a meal plan for an entire month. And yeah, then you can go back and look on Sunday night and be like, does this actually work for our week? Do we have like parent
Yeah.
teacher conferences and we need to move something around or just X a recipe and we all go out to eat after that or something? I just think that like that's the thing that came to mind when you talked about that is just like some people, it's true. Some people don't like meal planning. I actually think people like you and me who are planners and like to plan, we're probably more inclined to plan every week or
Yeah.
every 7 to 10 days. Cause it's like, I like planning. It makes me feel very accomplished for my week. I'm just like, ooh, I made my meal plan. We're going to the grocery store. But if you don't like that, I actually think that you should probably try to figure out how you can plan less, which means just like plan it in a chunk. Sit down for an hour, plan out your whole month. You spent 1 hour and you have like 28 recipes to go. That sounds awesome, actually.
Yeah, it does. I mean, that actually does sound great. And then, you don't even have to have a 2-week meal plan you duplicate. You have a 4-week meal plan you duplicate, and then next month's done too. Or you have the 30
Totally.
recipe cycle like Diana Rice does, and then you just have 30 recipes, and then that's done too. This just like every month is done for itself. I mean,
Yeah.
there are definitely ways to like make this thing that's so painful be much more simple.
Yeah, I agree. So one thing that I wanted to mention before we wrap up is I thought about this related to Diana Rice's idea for her capsule menus and only starting with a small number of recipes. If you're like me and Riley and you've been using Plan to Eat for multiple years, you probably have like 1,000 to 2,000 recipes in your Plan to Eat account. And what if you did this really fun? I'm saying it's fun. I don't know if it's actually fun, but I had this idea of just like maybe it's time to declutter your Plan to Eat recipe book. We all have those recipes in our recipe books that are like this delicious looking chocolate cake recipe. And it's like chocolate molten lava, something, but it takes like 2 days to make that recipe. And when you really think about your life, you're like, I'm never going to make that recipe. I'm not even that good of a baker. I'm never going to make this
Yeah.
recipe. Or you have the like sous vide method for making a steak or,
And you don't even
I
have a sous
find,
vide.
yeah, but you don't have a sous vide. So wouldn't you make that recipe? Or I have my stupid stroganoff recipe that is still in my Plan to Eat account that I accidentally planned. I think it could just be an interesting exercise if you are looking to de-stress your meal planning to, maybe the idea is just you go through and you kind of bulk edit your recipes. You create a new category in your recipe book where you're like, these are the recipes that we love. You could even call it your capsule recipes or something. And that's where you do the bulk of your meal planning from is from that course. So maybe it's more just like bulk editing, but I like the idea of like deleting and purging and getting rid of things. So I think this is an exercise I'm going to do myself. And it's probably going to take a little while because I think I have 1,800 recipes in my Plan to Eat account.
I have 2,412.
Yeah. See,
I
it
just
just
looked.
oh man. Recipe hoarders. Because
Mhm.
you see things all over the place and they sound good, but I make, in all honesty, I probably don't ever make more than 30 recipes in a rotation, in any sort of like a year-long rotation. So I should probably have fewer recipes in my account. But I just think that this could be a great way of reducing the clutter in your recipe book so you can just focus a little bit more on the point is to make the task of meal planning easier, not necessarily to collect all the recipes across the internet. So it's like, make your meal plan, get your food on the table, and then go do the other things in your life. Stop worrying about the meal planning part of it.
You started this podcast and you mentioned Marie Kondo. So it's funny that we're ending on this note, but
Oh,
I
that's
would
true.
say, look at your recipes and what does she say? Does this bring me
Spark
joy?
joy.
Does this
Yeah,
spark joy? I mean, go through your recipe book, delete them. I need to do it too. It's a good reminder, especially as we're, school is back. It's a new season. It's about to be holidays. Like all these things are converging on us at one time. So it's an encouragement to clean it out, clean house, make a simple meal plan, and simplify this process even more. And I think our future selves are going to thank us.
I agree. I like it. All right. Well, I think that's it for this week. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Plenty Podcast. We will be back. I will be back with an interview in 2 weeks, and we'll see Riley again at the end of next month. So thanks for listening.